Imagine being trapped in a cycle of repeating mistakes, falling into the same patterns, and wondering why you can't seem to break free. What if I told you that these recurring struggles aren't just coincidences? They're a powerful message from deep within your psyche. Deep within all of us is a hidden part of our mind, one that shapes our choices, influences our relationships, and controls our behaviors without us even realizing it. This part, called the shadow, holds the key to understanding why we make the same mistakes over and over again. But here's the twist. It's not just something we need to fear, it's something we need to embrace. When we learn to confront and integrate this shadow self, we unlock our true potential, stop repeating the past, and step into a life of wholeness, authenticity, and self-realization. Today, we're diving into Carl Jung's powerful theory of the shadow self and how understanding it can change your life forever. Have you ever found yourself saying, "Why does this keep happening to me?" Maybe it's falling for the same kind of toxic partner, sabotaging your own success, or getting stuck in the same argument with different people. These aren't just coincidences or bad luck. According to Carl Jung, these patterns come from deep within us, from a hidden part of our psyche called the shadow self. Jung believed that much of human behavior is not conscious but shaped by forces buried in the unconscious mind. And unless we become aware of these hidden parts, we're doomed to repeat the same behaviors over and over again. This video dives into one of Jung's most powerful ideas, that the unconscious holds parts of ourselves that we've rejected, denied, or ignored. These parts don't just disappear. Instead, they live on in the unconscious and silently shape our actions. Every time you react strongly to someone, find yourself stuck in a loop, or feel shame for something you don't fully understand, it's likely your shadow is involved. The repetition of mistakes isn't just carelessness, it's your unconscious trying to get your attention. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That quote alone reveals the heart of the problem. Most of us live on autopilot, unaware that our decisions are being guided by old wounds, fears, and hidden emotions. These unconscious patterns become like scripts we act out again and again, even when they cause us pain. Think about it like this. Your conscious mind is like the tip of the iceberg. It's what you're aware of, your thoughts, intentions, and goals. But beneath the surface lies a massive chunk of ice you can't see, your unconscious mind. This includes memories you've forgotten, emotions you've buried, and sides of yourself you don't want to admit exist. When something painful happens, like rejection, failure, or shame, we often push it down rather than deal with it. Over time, these experiences form the shadow. But just because we ignore the shadow doesn't mean it goes away. In fact, it becomes more powerful when it's unconscious. It sneaks into your decisions, relationships, and reactions. For example, someone who represses their anger might always act nice on the surface, but they unconsciously attract people who mistreat them, mirroring the anger they refuse to feel. Another person might always feel like a victim, not realizing that they are unconsciously recreating situations where they're powerless because they haven't faced their fear of standing up for themselves. This is why self-awareness is so important. The more we understand what's hidden inside us, the more power we have to choose differently. Jung didn't believe in simply getting rid of the shadow. Instead, he taught that we must face it, understand it, and integrate it into our conscious self. This process can be uncomfortable, but it's also the key to growth, freedom, and breaking out of painful cycles. So, when you notice you're repeating the same mistake, don't just get frustrated or blame others. Ask yourself, what am I not seeing? What part of me is being expressed here without my permission? That's where transformation begins. The patterns that trap us are not punishments. They're messages from our unconscious urging us to grow. By exploring Jung's theory of the shadow, This video will help you understand the deeper reason behind repeated mistakes. We'll look at how the shadow is formed, how it controls your life without your awareness, and most importantly, how you can face it and finally change those patterns that have held you back. Jung's insights offer a roadmap for self-discovery that is just as relevant today as it was 100 years ago. You're not broken, you're just unaware of what's been driving you. Once you see it clearly, you can begin to make conscious choices instead of repeating unconscious ones. And that's when real change begins. Carl Gustav Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst who revolutionized the way we understand the human mind. Born in 1875, he originally worked closely with Sigmund Freud, but as his ideas developed, he broke away and formed his own school of thought, analytical psychology. What made Jung different from other psychologists of his time was his deep belief that the unconscious wasn't just a storage room of repressed memories. It was a vast, intelligent realm with powerful influence over our lives. He saw the human psyche as a living system, full of meaning, symbols, and potential for transformation. Jung's work focused on understanding the full depth of the human personality, not just fixing problems on the surface. He believed that true healing and growth come from exploring the parts of ourselves we don't normally see or accept. One of his most groundbreaking ideas was the concept of the shadow self, the hidden side of our personality that we tend to reject or ignore. According to Jung, this shadow holds everything we don't want to be, our fears, desires, weaknesses, and instincts that society or our upbringing taught us were unacceptable. But Jung didn't think the shadow was evil or something to get rid of. Instead, he believed it was essential to our personal growth. The shadow, he said, is not just made up of bad traits. It also contains creativity, power, passion, and parts of our true self that got buried because they didn't fit in. Integrating the shadow, facing it, understanding it, and accepting it is key to becoming whole. This process is what Jung called individuation, the journey of becoming your true self. Jung's ideas went far beyond typical psychology. He explored myths, religions, dreams, art, and even alchemy to understand the soul's journey. He believed that symbols and archetypes, universal patterns found across cultures, were clues to what's happening inside us. For example, the hero, the mother, the trickster, these are all archetypes that live within our psyche and appear in our dreams, stories, and behaviors. Jung believed these symbols came from the collective unconscious, a deep layer of the psyche shared by all humans. Though many of his ideas were once considered unusual or mystical, Jung's work has become deeply influential in both psychology and popular culture. His concepts are now found in therapy, literature, film, and even spiritual practices. Jung's focus on the inner world, dreams, symbols, and personal growth inspired countless people to look within rather than just blaming the outside world for their problems. One of the most quoted Jung statements is, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This captures the essence of his approach. Instead of pretending to be perfect or constantly chasing positivity, Jung encouraged people to face their inner darkness, to explore what they've been avoiding. He believed that this courage to look inward is what leads to true strength, authenticity, and self-knowledge. Jung also gave great importance to dreams. He saw them not just as random images, but as meaningful messages from the unconscious. He believed that by analyzing dreams, people could discover what their shadow was trying to reveal. For Jung, dreams were like a secret language of the soul, one that could guide us toward wholeness. Even today, Jung's work feels deeply relevant. In a world that often rewards shallow appearances and quick fixes, his teachings invite us to slow down and truly meet ourselves. They challenge us to ask, what am I not seeing? What part of myself have I disowned? And most importantly, what could I become if I faced it? Carl Jung was more than a psychologist. He was a seeker, a thinker, and a pioneer of the inner world. Through his insights, we gain not just tools for healing, but a deeper understanding of who we are and why we repeat the same mistakes. The shadow may be hidden, but Jung reminds us that within that darkness lies the key to transformation. The shadow self is one of Carl Jung's most powerful and misunderstood ideas. According to Jung, the shadow is made up of all the parts of ourselves that we push away, deny, or don't want to admit exist. It includes traits we were taught were bad, unacceptable, or unlovable. For example, if you were told as a child not to be angry, you might have pushed your anger deep down. Over time, that anger doesn't disappear. It becomes part of your shadow. But the shadow isn't just made of negative traits. It can also include positive qualities we've suppressed because we were told they weren't appropriate. Maybe you were naturally confident or outspoken, but someone told you to stay quiet or not be arrogant. So you learn to hide those parts too. The shadow is like a storage room in the unconscious, filled with everything we've exiled, good and bad. Jung said the shadow begins forming in childhood. As we grow up, we're taught what is acceptable in our family, culture, or religion. To be loved and accepted, we adapt. We show the parts of ourselves that get approval and hide the rest. This hidden part becomes the shadow. It doesn't go away just because we stop acknowledging it. It stays alive in our unconscious and finds ways to express itself, usually without our control. For example, someone who thinks of themselves as nice and avoids conflict might suddenly explode in anger when they're pushed too far. They might say, "I don't know what came over me." That's the shadow speaking. It shows up when we least expect it, through emotional triggers, jealousy, harsh judgments, passive-aggressive behavior, or sudden mood swings. We see the shadow not only in ourselves, but in how we react to others. Jung said that when we feel intense dislike for someone, it's often because they represent something in us that we're denying. This is called projection, when we see in others what we can't see in ourselves. For example, a person who suppresses their ambition might criticize others for being selfish or too driven. Or someone uncomfortable with their vulnerability might mock others for being too emotional. Projection is one of the key ways the shadow operates. It's easier to judge others than to face our own inner contradictions. The shadow thrives in secrecy. The more we avoid it, the more control it has over us. That's why people repeat the same arguments, attract the same types of partners, or sabotage themselves right before success. The shadow silently influences our choices. It wants to be seen, not to hurt us, but to heal us. Jung believed that the path to wholeness begins when we turn inward and acknowledge these hidden parts. Facing the shadow doesn't mean acting out its darkest impulses. It means understanding where those impulses come from and why they're there. If you've suppressed your anger, for example, shadow work might help you learn how to express that anger in a healthy, constructive way. If you've hidden your desire for attention, it might be about learning to take up space without guilt. The goal is not to eliminate the shadow, but to integrate it, to bring it into consciousness so it can work with us, not against us. Shadow integration brings freedom. It reduces the emotional charge behind your reactions and helps you understand yourself on a deeper level. You stop being a prisoner to old patterns and start making conscious choices. You become more whole, more real, and more in control of your life. Jung once said, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort." In other words, facing the shadow takes courage. It means letting go of the mask, admitting your flaws, and being honest about your inner world. But it's also the path to true strength. When you stop running from the parts of yourself you've hidden, you discover your full potential. The shadow isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. It holds the key to your patterns, your pain, and ultimately, your power. By understanding what you've hidden, you begin the journey toward becoming your most authentic self. Most people believe they are fully in control of their actions, but Carl Jung revealed a deeper truth. Much of our behavior is shaped by the unconscious mind, and especially by the shadow self. The shadow doesn't whisper, it directs. And the most powerful part? It does this without you even knowing. You may think you're making rational choices, but often it's your unacknowledged emotions, fears, and wounds that are really in charge. The shadow expresses itself in indirect, sneaky, and often destructive ways. It shows up in emotional outbursts that feel out of character, in toxic relationship patterns, self-sabotage, addictions, procrastination, perfectionism, and unexplained anxiety. These behaviors are not random. They are the shadow trying to communicate. If you continually fall into the same traps, react the same way in conflicts, or regret decisions you can't explain, your shadow is likely pulling the strings behind the scenes. Let's take an example. Imagine someone who always tries to please others. On the surface, they seem kind and generous, but deep inside, they may feel resentment, exhaustion, or even anger. Why? Because a part of them, the shadow, has needs they've learned to ignore. Maybe they fear being seen as selfish, so they overcompensate by always saying yes. Eventually, the shadow erupts. They lash out, withdraw, or become passive-aggressive. And then they feel confused, guilty, or ashamed. This cycle repeats because the root issue, what the shadow is trying to express, remains unacknowledged. Another example is when someone continually ends up in relationships with emotionally unavailable people. They might say, "Why does this always happen to me?" But instead of coincidence, Jung would say, this is the unconscious repeating a familiar emotional script. Maybe they fear intimacy but don't realize it. So they're drawn to people who can't get close. Or perhaps they crave validation from those who won't give it, mirroring an unresolved wound from childhood. These patterns aren't bad luck. They're the shadow recreating the same scenario until it's seen and understood. One of the shadow's favorite tools is projection. Jung described projection as the process by which we attribute our hidden qualities to others. When you dislike someone for being arrogant, ask yourself, is there a part of you that has ambition, pride, or confidence you've been taught to suppress? The people who trigger us the most often reflect parts of our shadow. This doesn't mean they're innocent. It means our intense emotional response reveals something unresolved in us. The shadow also affects your internal dialogue, the way you talk to yourself. If you carry unprocessed shame, your inner critic may constantly whisper, "You're not good enough, you'll fail," or "You don't deserve this." These voices are often rooted in childhood experiences, cultural conditioning, or past traumas. They become internalized parts of the shadow that influence your self-worth, choices, and goals. Jung emphasized that the less aware you are of your shadow, the more power it has. In his words, the shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one is spared who goes down to the deep well. What he meant is that facing the shadow isn't easy, but ignoring it is far worse. When you leave your shadow in the dark, it governs your life. When you bring it to light, you reclaim your freedom. The good news is that once you start recognizing these patterns, you can begin to change them. Awareness is the first step. When you notice yourself reacting strongly, repeating behaviors, or feeling stuck, pause and ask, what part of me is being expressed right now? What am I avoiding? This is how you start a conversation with your shadow. The more conscious you become of your hidden drives, the more choice you have. You can respond instead of react. You can make decisions based on your values, not your wounds. You can break cycles that have ruled your life for years. This is not about being perfect, it's about being whole. The shadow isn't here to destroy you. It's here to guide you toward healing, honesty, and authenticity. It wants to be seen, not suppressed. And when you finally understand how it's been controlling your behavior, you begin to take back your life. Have you ever told yourself, "This time will be different," only to find yourself back in the same situation again? Maybe you promised not to date someone like your ex, or you swore you'd stop procrastinating, or that you'd finally break free from self-doubt. But somehow, despite your best intentions, you find yourself repeating the same mistake. Carl Jung had a powerful explanation for this. You're not just making choices, you're being driven by your unconscious. Jung believed that the human mind is not fully aware of all its motivations. In fact, a huge part of your mind, the unconscious, is shaping your thoughts, behaviors, and relationships without your awareness. When you keep making the same mistake, it's often because there's a hidden emotional wound or fear operating beneath the surface. This wound lives in the shadow. The shadow repeats patterns not to punish you, but to get your attention. It's like an alarm bell saying, "There's something here you need to look at." But most people don't listen. They blame the outside world, bad luck, toxic people, or unfair circumstances. But the real work begins when you look inward. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." That means your repeated mistakes are not random. They are deeply meaningful. Let's say you constantly find yourself drawn to controlling or emotionally distant partners. On the surface, it might seem like unfortunate coincidence, but Jung would ask, what part of your shadow is being activated here? Maybe deep down you believe love has to be earned. Maybe you fear vulnerability but crave closeness, so you attract someone who mirrors that internal conflict. The relationship becomes a stage where your unconscious story plays out again and again, until you recognize it. Or imagine someone who keeps sabotaging their success. Every time things start to go well, they accidentally mess it up. They forget a deadline, start a fight, or quit too early. This isn't laziness, it's fear. Deep in the shadow might be a belief like, "I don't deserve success," or "If I succeed, people will leave me." These beliefs were likely formed early in life, through painful experiences and then pushed out of awareness. But they never really left. They simply began writing the script from behind the curtain. Jung emphasized that the unconscious seeks wholeness. That means the shadow will keep showing up in your life through relationships, failures, dreams, and emotional triggers until you finally pay attention. Repetition is not a flaw in your character. It's a sign that your psyche is trying to heal. But healing can't happen if you keep ignoring the message. One of Jung's most famous quotes is, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." In other words, until you confront your shadow, you will keep acting out the same emotional story. You'll keep falling into the same trap, not because you're weak or broken, but because your inner wounds are still unhealed. The first step to breaking the cycle is awareness. Start noticing your emotional patterns. Where do you feel stuck? What situations keep repeating? What kind of people are you drawn to? And most importantly, what feeling lies beneath those experiences? Fear, shame, guilt, abandonment. Once you begin to identify the emotion behind the pattern, you've started the journey out of it. Next comes responsibility, not blame, but ownership. This means recognizing that while you didn't choose your childhood wounds or early experiences, you are responsible for your healing. This is empowering because once you stop waiting for life to stop testing you and instead start listening to what the test is trying to teach you, everything changes. And finally, compassion. Shadow work is not about judging yourself. It's about understanding yourself. The parts of you that repeat mistakes are not evil. They're wounded, scared, or stuck in an outdated survival strategy. When you approach those parts with curiosity and care, instead of shame, you begin to integrate them. You stop fighting yourself and start healing. You repeat the same mistakes not because you're flawed, but because your soul is trying to finish a story. Jung showed us that these patterns are invitations, calls to grow, to become more whole, and to live more consciously. The moment you stop running from them and start listening, the pattern begins to break. One of the most fascinating and revealing ways the shadow operates is through projection. Projection happens when you attribute your own hidden qualities, emotions, or desires onto someone else. Instead of recognizing a part of yourself in your feelings, you see it in others. This is one of the shadow's most powerful tricks, because it allows us to avoid facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves while still reacting strongly to them. Carl Jung believed that projection is a defense mechanism. It allows us to disown the parts of ourselves we can't accept while simultaneously seeing them in others. In simple terms, it's like holding up a mirror to the world and seeing things you don't want to face reflected back at you. For example, if you feel guilty about your own ambition, you might look at someone else who is successful and criticize them for being selfish or arrogant. That criticism is not about them, it's about you. You're projecting your hidden desires and feelings onto them. Jung argued that projection is the unconscious mind's way of keeping the shadow hidden. When you project, you refuse to look within. It's much easier to point fingers at others than to confront the parts of yourself that you've repressed. But the more you project, the more you remain blind to the very qualities in yourself that you're judging in others. For example, if you tend to dislike someone for being too emotional or weak, it may be because you have difficulty showing your own vulnerability or emotional side. In this case, their behavior reminds you of the parts of yourself that you've rejected. Rather than acknowledging your own emotions, you dismiss them by projecting them onto others. But here's the truth. The traits that annoy or trigger you most in other people often mirror aspects of your own shadow. Another classic example is in relationships. Often people will project their unresolved feelings onto their partners. A person who feels unworthy of love might accuse their partner of being distant or unloving, not realizing that their own inner fears are coloring the way they interpret the relationship. Their partner may be doing nothing wrong at all, but the person is projecting their own emotional wound onto them. Jung believed that projection plays a significant role in repeating mistakes. For instance, if you've had a painful experience of betrayal in the past, you might unconsciously project that feeling of betrayal onto a new person in your life, expecting them to hurt you even if they've shown no signs of doing so. This projection distorts your reality and influences your behavior, often leading to unnecessary conflict, stress, and even the ending of relationships that were otherwise healthy. The most difficult and enlightening part of projection is that we don't even realize we're doing it. We believe that our judgment of others is an objective truth, when in fact it's an emotional reaction to an internal conflict that we haven't yet resolved. But when you become aware of your projections, you can begin to reclaim that energy. You stop giving power to the people and situations that trigger you. Instead of seeing the world through the lens of blame and judgment, you start to see it as a reflection of your own inner world. A key to healing from projection is self-reflection. The next time you find yourself reacting strongly to someone, ask yourself, what part of me is being triggered right now? Instead of blaming them, explore the emotions or qualities that have stirred you. Do you feel anger, jealousy, insecurity, or fear? What does that reveal about your own shadow? Often, when we start to look inward, we realize that we're projecting our own struggles, insecurities, and unresolved feelings onto others. Jung also believed that projection is one of the most powerful ways we can begin to understand our shadow. By seeing the shadow in others, we gain a deeper awareness of the parts of ourselves we've ignored. This can lead to profound self-discovery. When you recognize your own projections, you begin to reclaim those rejected aspects of yourself. Instead of rejecting others, you integrate the parts of yourself that have been cast out into your conscious awareness. This is a powerful step toward wholeness. In short, projection is a way your unconscious protects you from uncomfortable truths, but it's also an opportunity for growth. If you can catch yourself projecting onto others and take responsibility for your feelings, you've begun the process of shadow integration. When you no longer need to project your shadow onto others, you can finally see the world and yourself more clearly. And that's where true freedom lies. Shadow work is the process of becoming aware of and integrating the parts of yourself that you've hidden, suppressed, or denied. It's not about getting rid of the shadow, it's about understanding it, accepting it, and using its energy for growth and transformation. Carl Jung saw shadow work as one of the most crucial steps in the journey of individuation, the process of becoming your true, whole self. So why is shadow work so important? Because as long as the shadow remains hidden, it controls you from the unconscious. It shapes your behavior, your relationships, and your life choices. The goal of shadow work isn't to eliminate the shadow, but to bring it into the light of your consciousness. When you do this, the shadow no longer holds power over you. Instead, it becomes a valuable ally in your quest for wholeness and self-realization. The first step in shadow work is recognizing your shadow. This can be challenging because the shadow often contains parts of ourselves that we consider bad, weak, or unacceptable. These are the qualities we've been conditioned to reject. Anger, jealousy, fear, selfishness, or even traits like ambition, desire for power, or independence. Jung believed that every human being has a shadow, but what's hidden in it differs from person to person, based on our individual experiences and conditioning. To begin shadow work, you need to start by noticing the parts of yourself that you judge harshly. When do you feel intense dislike, irritation, or resentment toward others? Often these reactions point to something within you that you're rejecting. Maybe it's a quality you have but don't want to acknowledge, or a feeling you're not allowing yourself to express. For instance, if you feel anger toward someone who is assertive, it could be because you've suppressed your own assertiveness. Shadow work helps you identify these projections and bring the rejected parts of yourself into your awareness. The next step in shadow work is to engage in self-reflection. You can ask yourself questions like, what do I not like about myself? What part of me do I try to hide from others? What are the traits in others that trigger me the most? When you start asking these questions, you begin to understand what's lurking in your shadow. You may be surprised to find that the things you criticize most in others are actually traits you've buried deep within yourself. One of the most powerful tools in shadow work is journaling. Writing down your thoughts and feelings can help you clarify what's going on beneath the surface. Try writing about situations that trigger strong emotions in you, whether it's anger, jealousy, guilt, or frustration. Ask yourself why you feel this way and explore what it might reveal about your shadow. This process can help you untangle your emotions and identify the underlying beliefs or experiences that are influencing your behavior. Another important aspect of shadow work is embracing the parts of yourself that you've rejected. This is where self-compassion becomes crucial. Instead of beating yourself up for having bad qualities, acknowledge that these parts of yourself exist, but they don't define you. For example, if you've repressed your anger because you were taught it's wrong to feel angry, shadow work helps you understand that anger is a natural emotion. It doesn't have to lead to violence or destruction. Instead, anger can be channeled into healthy expression, like setting boundaries or standing up for yourself. Shadow work also involves recognizing and embracing the positive qualities that live in your shadow. These are the parts of yourself that you've been taught aren't appropriate, but are actually essential for your growth. Maybe you've repressed your creativity, passion, or desire for success because you were taught that being too bold or ambitious is selfish. Shadow work helps you reclaim these suppressed qualities and bring them into your conscious life, allowing you to become more balanced and integrated. One of the most challenging aspects of shadow work is facing the fear of who you might become once you integrate your shadow. Many people resist shadow work because they're afraid of losing their identity or becoming someone they don't recognize. But Jung believed that facing the shadow is a path to greater authenticity and power. When you no longer hide from yourself, you can fully embrace your potential. You can stop living in reaction to past wounds and start creating a life based on your true desires and values. Finally, shadow work requires patience and persistence. This is not something you do once and then forget about. It's an ongoing journey that involves regularly checking in with yourself, confronting your unconscious patterns, and embracing the parts of yourself that you've been avoiding. The more you do this, the more you begin to live in alignment with your true self. Embracing your shadow is not just a psychological exercise. It's a spiritual and emotional journey that leads to wholeness. Carl Jung believed that only when we fully acknowledge and integrate our shadow can we become the person we were always meant to be. The shadow, as dark and uncomfortable as it may seem, holds the key to unlocking the deepest parts of ourselves. Embracing it is essential for personal transformation, self-awareness, and living an authentic life. The idea of integrating the shadow doesn't mean accepting your flaws or weaknesses as permanent. Rather, it means understanding them, accepting them, and using the energy they bring to propel yourself forward. Jung's idea of individuation, the process of becoming a whole, integrated person, can only happen when we stop denying our shadows and begin to make peace with them. When we refuse to acknowledge our shadow, we live a fragmented life. We might present an idealized version of ourselves to the world, constantly pretending to be something we're not. This leads to a deep inner conflict. Our conscious selves struggle against the unconscious forces that are constantly bubbling up from the shadow. This struggle manifests as emotional turmoil, poor relationships, self-sabotage, and unfulfilled desires. The more we resist, the more we suffer. But when we embrace the shadow, we allow ourselves to become whole. This process requires immense courage. It's not easy to look at the darker parts of ourselves and acknowledge that they are a part of who we are. It's hard to accept that we might have the capacity for anger, greed, jealousy, or selfishness. But the truth is, those traits don't define you. They are simply aspects of the human experience that everyone must face. By confronting them, we allow ourselves to heal and grow. Integrating the shadow also means accepting that we are not perfect. Perfectionism is one of the shadow's favorite tricks, and many people spend their lives trying to be flawless, only to fall into deeper anxiety, frustration, and shame. Accepting your shadow means recognizing that your imperfections are part of your humanity, not something to be ashamed of. When you stop striving for an idealized version of yourself, you can finally start to live authentically. You learn to love yourself as you are without pretending to be someone else. Jung saw the process of shadow integration as deeply liberating. When you no longer need to hide from your own darkness, you gain tremendous freedom. You stop being at war with yourself. Instead of constantly battling your flaws, you acknowledge them and channel that energy into positive, creative endeavors. You stop projecting your wounds onto others and begin to take full responsibility for your actions and reactions. This leads to healthier relationships, more self-compassion, and a deeper sense of purpose. The integration of the shadow also opens you up to greater creativity and potential. The shadow holds repressed energies, often creative, powerful, or passionate, that we've learned to suppress. When we embrace those aspects, we free up untapped reserves of personal power. Shadow work, far from being a painful process of stripping away, becomes an exciting journey of self-discovery, where you learn more about your true desires, strengths, and capabilities. However, embracing the shadow is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing process. Our shadows evolve as we grow and change. There are new layers to uncover as we encounter new life experiences. Therefore, embracing your shadow means committing to continuous self-reflection and growth. It's a lifelong practice that involves regularly checking in with yourself, examining your patterns, and confronting the parts of you that are still hidden. Jung believed that integrating the shadow ultimately leads to greater peace. When we stop fighting our dark side, we stop being divided. We begin to live from a place of wholeness. We become more compassionate, not just toward ourselves, but toward others as well. We understand that everyone has a shadow, and we become less judgmental, more accepting, and more empathetic. Ultimately, embracing your shadow is about accepting the full spectrum of your humanity. It's about being honest with yourself and acknowledging that you are both light and dark. Only by embracing both can you step into your true potential and live an authentic, fulfilled life. As Jung famously said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. By facing your shadow, you stop living in reaction to your past and start creating the life you truly desire. You stop being driven by unconscious patterns and take control of your fate. The shadow is not the enemy, it's a teacher. When you learn to embrace it, you unlock a deeper, richer, and more empowered version of yourself. This is the path to wholeness, the journey of self-acceptance, self-love, and self-realization.